The Senator from Hawaii.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's really a simple proposition, and it's a scary one. As soon as this legislation is enacted, Internet service providers can collect your browsing data and sell it without your permission. Now, there's a lot of conversation about who has jurisdiction, the FTC or the FCC, and who is more appropriate to govern Internet privacy, whether this should be a public sector or a private sector question. But the basic question is this for the pending legislation, and that is, should ISPs, should your Internet service provider be allowed to collect your browsing data without your permission and sell it? And I think the answer for 98% of the public is a resounding no. So right now there is a single federal agency that has the authority to protect consumers and their privacy when it comes to data collected by ISPs, and that's the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission. But the Republicans are proposing that the Congress strip the FCC's ability to protect your privacy, and when they succeed, the American people will lose the very few federal protections that they have when it comes to online privacy. Think about how much of your life is online today. Banking, health, your interactions with your kids' interactions with other kids. It's incredibly personal, and it's not just confidential information in a traditional sense or in a legal sense. It's really a complete picture of everything that you are. And that's why this is worth fighting about. It's worth protecting. That's why the FCC made these rules, to recognize that we live so much of our lives online, and that in a lot of instances we don't really feel like we have a choice about whether or not we're going to engage in a contract to get broadband service. That's a necessity for many of us. And so consumers deserve some basic protections. And so not only do the Republicans want to get rid of the rule that the FCC to basically say that an ISP cannot collect your data and sell it for commercial purposes, but they want to do it in a way that will ensure that no federal agency, not a single one, will have jurisdiction over privacy for consumers using broadband. They're trying to take the referee off of the playing field, and for good. The problem is very simple. There are actually two agencies that could have jurisdiction over privacy online, but there was a Ninth Circuit Court decision that made a ruling that removes the jurisdiction of the Federal Trade Commission over online privacy in the broadband space. So, of the two agencies, FTC and FCC, FTC, according to this federal court, no longer has jurisdiction. Now, it's the FCC's side of the house. But if we repeal the FCC rule, the way the Congressional Review Act runs is that it will prevent us from ever addressing something, quote, substantially similar again. And so this isn't about agreeing or disagreeing with this rule. This isn't about whether you think the FCC or the FTC ought to appropriately deal with this. This isn't a question about whether you think we should exercise our prerogatives in the public sector or the private sector. This is about whether or not you think that nobody should have jurisdiction over your privacy online. And so what's the solution here? Well, we should work with private sector leaders, the FCC and the FTC, to find a comprehensive approach to privacy online. That's what this legislative body should be doing. Instead of aggressively digging into this issue on behalf of consumers, we're actually blowing up the only thing we've got, which is this FCC rule. To repeat, by using the Congressional Review Act, Republicans are forever preventing the FCC from protecting your privacy if you use broadband. I want to end by noting that 55 years ago this month, President Kennedy gave a seminal speech about consumer rights. He spoke about the march of technology, how it had outpaced old laws and regulations, and how fast that progress had occurred. He noted that in just a few decades, supermarkets went from carrying 1,500 products to more than 6,000. Doctors wrote 90% of their prescriptions for drugs that no one had even heard of 20 years before. But let's fast forward to the present day. and we've blown those numbers out of the water. The average supermarket carries 40,000 products. In 2015 alone, the FDA approved 51 new drugs. And of course, we now have the internet, which in the United States grew from 148 million users to nearly 240 million in just 15 years. And the next non-incremental change in technology in our lives will be the Internet of Things, in which we will have tens of billions of devices connected to each other and interacting with us, whether we like it or not. And so the march of technology goes on, but what stays the same is the bedrock principle that President Kennedy outlined, that consumers have the right to be safe, they have the right to be informed, they have the right to choose, and they have the right to be heard. Those rights are in jeopardy. The FCC took a small but important step. Now the Republicans are blowing that up. Let me be clear, this is the single biggest step backwards in online privacy in many years. And we've failed the American people when it comes to their privacy. We should be staring this problem in the face. What we are doing tonight and tomorrow is making it worse. And that's why I'll vote no, and I urge my colleagues to vote no on this resolution. I yield the floor.